Hi everyone, welcome back to The Learning Gardener. If you haven't been here before, my name is Pip and today we are going to be talking about freeze drying food. Now, the reason there is a lot of background noise at the moment is because that is the freeze dryer going now. And I just wanted you guys to hear what a freeze dryer actually sounds like while it's running, because a lot of channels that I've seen before will talk about how it's not that much louder than your dishwasher. And I don't know what kind of dishwashers they've got, but it's a lot louder than mine. So I am just going to go and check and see if the food is ready and done, and then we are going to package it up and we are going to be moving fast because it is a very humid day today. Freeze drying is a process which involves the removal of 99% of the water content from your food. It involves no heating or cooking like standard dehydrating, and this allows you to maintain about 95 to 97% of the food's original nutritional value as a result of the process of freeze drying. It means that your food is shelf stable in some cases for up to 25 years, although it does depend hugely on how you store the food and also on what the food that you freeze dried is. By removing the water content, the food becomes significantly lighter, and if powdered, you can actually turn a huge quantity of food into a very small amount of stored food. And that is really great when it comes to storing your summer harvest. It takes up a lot less room in your pantry, but obviously there's a significant cost involved with getting a freeze dryer. My freeze dryer is from Harvest Right, and in order for it to function, there are a couple of ways in which I use it. You can only freeze dry stuff that is either all frozen or all thawed. You can't run a load that is half frozen and half thawed. And so usually what that means is that I'll do a load of things like spinach and herbs straight out of the garden, and then I'll do a load of frozen things like bone broth. You can put everything into the freeze dryer in its natural unfrozen state. It's just that with things like bone broth, the freezing time dramatically increases the run time of the freeze dryer, which significantly increases the amount of power you're using, and it's actually more economical to freeze it in your freezer and have everything fully frozen when you pop it in the freeze dryer. Freeze drying doesn't actually kill off the bacteria, so you need to be really careful when you think about what you're going to freeze dry. For example, you would do a whole batch of eggs to prevent any transference of salmonella or any bacteria, and the same goes for raw meat. You really need to consider what you're putting it in with and the fat content of that meat. Really fatty foods like meat and really oily foods don't tend to freeze dry well because fat goes rancid, which also means that sadly you can't freeze dry chocolate, which is really disappointing because if there was a zombie apocalypse or I was prepping for the end of the world as we know it, chocolate is the number one thing that I would freeze dry. It also means that things like butter, some candy, and some types of cookies don't freeze dry well. While you can freeze dry some candy, like Skittles are a really popular thing to freeze dry, some foods with super high sugar contents should not be freeze dried, and that's things like jams, jellies, and honey. While you can freeze dry garlic, I have found that it makes your freeze dryer stink for ages, and you basically have to do a couple of cleans and change the oil after to get rid of the garlic smell. That, and you need to make sure your garlic is well diced up so that the liquid can be dried out of the food. And the same goes for things like blueberries. Unless you want to be there waiting for it to dry for the rest of your natural life, you need to pierce the blueberries in order to facilitate the drying process. That being said, lately I have been using my freeze dryer more and more to preserve the summer harvest. I have been making a lot of roast tomato sauce, and I just roast the tomatoes, some onion, and a lot of garlic because I like garlic, and then I blitz it up. I've also been making a tromboncino version of my pumpkin soup. So tromboncinos, when green, can be used like a zucchini. When orange, they can be used like a butternut pumpkin. So I have just substituted them for butternut pumpkin in this pumpkin soup recipe, and they're just a bit nuttier and more full in flavor. And I decided to freeze dry multiple batches of these so that I could have ready to go meals. What I discovered was that freeze drying an entire tray of pureed tomato was probably not my best move because it took forever to dry, and it meant that it had a little bit more stickiness to it from the sugar content, and it did seem to be dry, but I think I will probably use that powder sooner rather than later, just because the slight stickiness of the sugars does concern me that there is a little bit more moisture than 99% gone. So I will definitely go through and use that. I've also been focusing on trying to package up some other ready-made meals with a higher protein content. So I made some chili con carne, and I made a beef bone broth soup with chunks of meat and veggies in it that was just delicious. And I want to try and build up a supply of 3 months of ready-made homegrown nutritious food, because I'm gluten-free and I have a lot of health issues, and I just want to have some meals that are ready for me at any given moment, that all I need to do is add warm water to in order to reconstitute. And I have tested some of the soups and a minestrone and some spaghetti bolognese, and they reconstitute perfectly. Some things just need a little bit more time to reconstitute, and I have found that in terms of speeding up the freeze drying process and making sure that everything dries perfectly, the more surface area you can allow the freeze dryer to have, the better. And that is why I started using the silicone soap mold trays, just to give the machine more of a chance. And so the second time I made a batch of the roast pumpkin pasta sauce, it actually turned out a lot better and definitely a bit drier. The nice thing about this is it lets me use recipes that are not canning friendly, and I can also choose how I use it. So if I reconstitute that back to the exact same level, it's a pasta sauce, but if I put less water in it, I could use it as a pizza-based sauce. And this is what everything looks like right before it goes into the freeze dryer. This particular load is 5 trays and took about 48 hours to process. In terms of liquid that was removed from the food, at the end of the freeze drying process, once it was defrosted, there was about 6 liters of fluid, so 1.5 gallons of water that had been removed from this food in order to store it and make it shelf stable. Once you've decided if you're putting in fresh produce or frozen produce, the actual process is very simple. You turn on the machine, press start up. It does a 15-minute cooling cycle. It tells you then when it's ready, open the door, put the food in, you load the trays up, close the valve and press go. And then the sensors in the machine will decide when the freezing time is done, when it's time to add vacuum, and when it's in the drying phase, and finally when it's done. I always add extra time to the drying phase. Now you've seen what I've been working on, let's get it out and see what it's like when it's finished. This is a tomato and garlic and onion sauce that I roasted and made, and you can see once it's dry it just snaps apart really easily. Then we've got a chili con carne with rice, and hopefully you can hear that on the microphone, but that is bone dry. The tomato paste is dry. It feels like styrofoam, but it does have a slight sugary feel to the thicker pieces, which is something that is quite common with tomato. And this is just seeded tomato, and you can hear that snap really easily. Last but not least, in these soap molds we put a beef stew. And again, you can see that is totally dry. So now that these are out and dry, I want to get them processed and put away as fast as possible. Freeze-dried food does suck up the moisture from the air quite easily, especially once you start powdering things, in my experience. And because I live in a coastal zone, I find that it happens really, really quickly, which is why today I have put the air conditioning on like an hour before I wanted to take everything out of the freeze dryer, because we have had something like 140 mils of rain in the last 24 hours, and it's quite quite humid today. So what I'm doing is putting the beef stew ones in a Mylar bag. So these Mylar bags I get from Wallaby, which I buy from Amazon. They aren't the cheapest of Mylar bags, but that's kind of the point. The cheaper ones really, like, you notice the quality difference. And with freeze-dried food, if you're wanting your food to last years or even 25 years, you really need a high quality vessel to store them in. So what I'm going to do is quickly pop in some oxygen absorbers that will suck out all the oxygen, not necessarily all the air, but all the oxygen out of these bags, and seal them up. So I do try and squeeze out as much air as I can as I am sealing the bag. And then I used to use a Harvest Right sealer that came with the freeze dryer, but we were recently looking after my mum's new rescue dog Dobby, and he chewed through the cord. So we are using an old school hair straightener just to seal the edges of the Mylar bags. One of the things I like about putting things in Mylar bags is you can process them pretty quickly. You just chuck them in, put an oxygen absorber in, and seal them up, and then you have to find somewhere to store them. I do find storing them to be the main issue that I have, just because they're a little bit awkward to store, because obviously you don't want something to pierce the bag, so you have to be a little bit careful. But I prefer these particular ones from Wallaby because they come with a gusseted bottom, which just means that you can have them standing up when you fill them, which for me is far preferable than to assume that I'm not going to make a massive mess and make another kind of Mylar bag stand up correctly. So we get another oxygen absorber in here. You've just got to work as fast as you can. You guys can probably hear that rain coming down now because it's bucketing down again. Okay, so that's some freeze-dried ready meals. I'm going to stick the tomatoes straight in here. The bonus of freeze-drying tomatoes is that you can then do whatever you want with them and you don't have to deal with canning. So if I want to use these to make tomato paste, when I reconstitute them, I just put minimal water in. If I want to reconstitute them back to their fresh status as they were when I freeze-dried them, then I can just put more water in until they are actually back to the same texture as what they were before. And I'm just going to I've just jammed those in a little bit because I only want to do 1 jar of tomatoes. And to be honest, I usually use these in things that get blitzed up, like bolognese or things like that, or stews, so you wouldn't actually really see it. If it wasn't so humid today, I would probably actually blend these up, so I'm getting a tomato powder. But as I said, on the humid day, the faster you can just get things in and put away, the better, even with the air conditioning on. And sorry about all the additional background noise of the Mylar bags and the baking paper and things like that. And I know you can get with freeze dryers like special silicone liners to put on your trays to help you get things off the tray so they don't stick when you freeze dry them. But to be honest, I find baking paper works really, really well. And shipping from America is not always the cheapest option. So I just use baking paper, or I just forget about it and deal with it later. So what I will do is, once I am done doing this, I will actually vacuum seal as well, all of these, but for the time being, I'm just trying to get them put away as fast as possible. So the next thing I'm going to process is the tomato, and I'm just going to
powder this up. The idea of this is that I have a tomato sauce recipe for like pasta that I can make as thick as I want, and I didn't have to cook it down longer because the freeze drying process sucks all the water out for me. And I don't have to follow a canning safe recipe, which I don't always like the canning safe recipes, but I can still can essentially a ton of tomatoes. They're just in a powdered form. So all of that tomato sauce turned into one large quart-sized jar and 1 pint, and I'm just making sure that there's no tomato dust on the rims before I add the oxygen absorbers. And we're going to pop a lid on, and as I said, I will vacuum seal these on later. So this is so dry I can just sort of pick it up and snap it. What I'm going to do is put a whole bunch of it into the Mylar bag like that, and then I can kind of shove it down in there to create more room. This is still dry as a bone. I find tomatoes are a bit more like a sponge, and if there's any moisture at all, they just suck it straight up. To reconstitute something that's been cooked, you want to use hot water. If you're freezing, say, like raw tomato, you could just use cold water to reconstitute that and have it come back to its original form. Apparently Mylar bags like these ones, you could actually, if I was, let's say, camping, I could just pour the hot water into the Mylar bag and eat directly from the Mylar bag. I don't know if that is factual, but it's another argument for buying good quality bags, is that if that's what you're wanting to do with them, then you want to have a decent bag of good thickness so that it doesn't immediately melt when you put hot water in there to reconstitute your dinner at the end of a long day of hiking or exploring. So I keep my oxygen absorbers in a little jar. It is just a mason jar, and that keeps them from being exposed to the elements and going off. But for right now, I'm going to get these sealed. The other pro of the Wallaby bags is that they have, as you can hear, a snap seal, which means that once you open it, there's still a little bit of air in there. Once you open it, you can actually reseal it if you need to, or you could actually just use your hair straightener and close the surface again and keep using the bag. But it does mean that, say, if you are camping again and you have 2 portions in your Mylar bag, that you could open it and pour out some, make your meal, and then reseal it back up and have your food be good to go. Now, I don't actually use mine for camping. It's been a really long time since I've been camping. I love camping. I just haven't been lately, but I would totally take freeze-dried food with me when camping, because then you don't have the hassle. Like, I remember we used to go camping all the time when I was a little kid, and they used to have to really think about what foods they were going to bring for us for the 3 days, and a lot of the time it would be things like soups and stuff like that, so they could make them ahead and freeze them in one giant ice cube and use that to keep everything else cool for a couple of days. With the freeze dryer, okay, it's quite an expense for that purpose, but it is like, makes that sort of scenario of going camping heaps easier to manage. There's no eskies, there's no giant ice buckets, there's nothing. So we are all done, and I'm just going to pack that away and have a slightly less frantic conversation with you guys about the freeze dryer. So you might wonder, if I'm not going camping, what am I using all of these freeze dried meal ready packages for? And I've really only just started focusing on meals recently. It's something that I want to focus on more. I want to try and get a 3-month supply of meals that are freeze dried and ready to go, so that all I have to add is water. As if you've watched a lot of videos on this channel, you'll know that I've been through it medically lately, and I haven't even shared everything that's been happening with you guys. Like, I've just shared the big stuff, but there's been, it hasn't been the best. And I know that I've still got a fair bit more stuff to go through, and that with returning to work after losing my son, it's like, it's going to be a very stressful period. And my psychologist has said that I am going to be very tired, so I am trying to prepare for that. I am trying to make myself really nutritious, vitamin-rich meals that essentially the gluten-free person's equivalent of 2-minute noodles, because otherwise I know that when I am stressed, I will eat stuff that I shouldn't eat, and then that makes all of my other issues worse. And it means that all the work I've done on trying to heal my gut issues to help my autoimmune issues just is wasted if I eat the wrong foods, and my body is really, really sensitive to different types of food and processed food. So essentially what I'm trying to do is make a whole bunch of things that are ready to go at the drop of a hat. And so you can see now this has no ring on it. After I've vacuum sealed that, it's nice and sealed up, and that protects the food from moisture getting in there. Then it makes this very transportable for me. So if I am on the road or at work or at home and just like exhausted and can't be bothered and maybe going through it, that all I have to do is like at most add boiling water to these things, and a meal is ready to go, especially in the case of like the chili con carne and the beef stew that we packaged in the Mylar bags. The ones that are in the Mylar bags are also for more longer term storage. Generally, if you keep them in a mason jar, most people would say that you can keep them in a mason jar for 1 to 2 years. They do, because they're exposed to more light, even if you've got them in a cupboard, they do fade in color, but everything nutrition-wise is still there and fiber-wise is still there. Whereas it's a bit more protected in a Mylar bag, but obviously a Mylar bag is more puncturable and a little bit trickier to store, although glass jars, you still need somewhere to store them. Before this difficult period that I've been going through, the reason I freeze-dried food was more I was freeze-drying the basics. So like I would dice up onions and freeze-dry them. I would dice up celery, and so like I have a whole bunch of celery tops in there, so the celery leaf that I freeze dried because I had space in the freeze dryer and I wanted to get it out of the freezer, and I've been using that lately to add to my bone broths that I've been making. But so I mostly focused on things like that. But the other thing I did a lot of freeze drying of was herbs, and my favorites, rosemary and basil, because I really like the flavor of basil, but I don't love the texture of having just like a wet leaf on my food. So with freeze dried basil, it's totally dry, and because it's been freeze dried, it's almost like more potent in flavor, and you can just crunch it up and sprinkle it all over like your avocado toast, and it's amazing, tastes great. And I hate processing, this is just a thing for me, I hate processing rosemary, so I would rather do it all in one go. So because I just find when you do it, you get like a sticky stuff on your hand. I just don't like dealing with rosemary, so I prefer to just deal with it all in one go, and I freeze dry a massive batch of it, then it's totally dry, and then if I ever need to have chopped rosemary, I don't actually have to chop it, I just put it in my hands and do this, and it completely breaks down and powders, and it just makes life easier for me. But mostly I have freeze-dried things that have come directly out of the garden. Some of that is because I am still learning about canning, and when I was on my leaky gut diet, which I'm kind of working out where I am now, there was a lot of things I couldn't eat. I couldn't eat carrots, couldn't eat cabbage, couldn't eat eggs, couldn't eat dairy, no seafood, no chicken, and no gluten and no coffee, which is fine because I don't like coffee and I don't like cabbage and I don't like seafood. But a lot of canning recipes have carrot, a lot of canning recipes have cabbage, and I don't know enough about them to know what I can safely cut out of the recipes and what I could safely substitute instead of. And because I don't have that confidence in doing that, freeze drying is an awesome way to go, because like in the case of this tomato sauce, like I can turn this into a more thick paste now, or I can turn it into a more watery sauce, and I could make whatever recipe I wanted and have it freeze dried, and it's perfectly safe and stable. Whereas that's not necessarily the case with a canning recipe. And also, the fact that I was able to turn however many tomatoes into just this, I will show you the before and after, but the idea that many tomatoes can just turn into this in terms of storage is really, really helpful, because this house doesn't have a lot of storage. I did a lot of work on the floor plan when I moved into this house, but there's still a limit to the actual space that the house has and the storage. So freeze drying definitely reduces the amount of space you need to store food, and it reduces the weight. Like this was kilos and kilos of tomatoes, and now it's like nothing. It also gives me a lot of versatility. Like this many tomatoes would be about 3 or 4 of these canned, and the trouble is, if I want to make tomato paste from my own tomatoes, I have to cook that down for ages to get it to thicken up, and the quantity of tomatoes you need is unreal. This way, I can use it as diced tomatoes. I just put a little bit of water in. I can use it as fresh tomatoes, or I could turn it into a paste. I just blitz it up and put a tiny bit of water in until it's the consistency that I want, and I'm already at tomato paste with very little effort. I didn't have to skin these because when I powder them, the skin will just break down into nothing. All I did was remove the seeds, because seeds can take longer to freeze dry. You saw that these I freeze dried in little squares that were, I basically put the food into silicone soap molds, and I just found the last time I did an entire flat tray of this, because I've done that a lot with bone broth before. Bone broth and veggie broth are some of my favorite things to freeze dry, because then you just have it on standby whenever you need. And unlike canning, it doesn't take up a lot of space to have freeze dried bone broth. But I do find that it was harder to tell if everything dried. The trays came out piping hot, and if the trays come out hot, it's generally a pretty good sign. But when you freeze dry bone broth, it lifts up off the tray and you can really snap it. It is exactly like styrofoam. But I think because the amount of sugars in tomatoes is totally different to bone broth. It was a much heavier mixture, and so it couldn't lift. And even though everything felt dry, I don't know if it felt a touch sticky because there was still a touch more moisture, and I gave it like an extra 14 hours from when the machine said it was dry. Or I don't know if it was because I couldn't rotate the big slab of tomato sauce with the little blocks that I had made in the silicone soap mold. I could easily go in and flip those over to make sure the entire thing was dry, and also by freezing them in those little cubes or those little soap molds instead of as one big slab, you increase the available surface area for moisture to be sucked out of. So it was a lot faster, and I think potentially the other stuff is maybe not quite as dry as this, but yeah, it'd still be fine. So I'll just use the other stuff first. But I now have a stack of tomato sauce for pasta, or for whatever I want to use it for. I could even like not constitute this as much and just put a little bit of water in it and turn it into like a nice pizza base, a tomato base for a pizza, and that would be lovely. And I just find that the freeze dryer gives you a lot of flexibility with how you use the stuff that you freeze dry. And it's also really awesome for those moments. Like the other day I was like, oh God, I haven't got any onions, and then I realized I have freeze-dried onions from 2 years ago in the cupboard, so I can just pop those open and use them anytime. But as I said, my aim lately is to work on getting meal-ready packs or meal-ready jars. I've also been trying to do more freeze-dryer loads lately because while it's still longer days, I get more use out of my solar energy. But I do find the offside of that is that the freeze-dryer produces a lot of heat, and if the room it's in gets, I think it's above 27 degrees, it doesn't function very well, which then means I need to run the air conditioning at the same time, which doesn't work well overnight if the nights aren't cooling down. So it's a bit hit and miss. So I do tend to like to do it on cooler days, or days where it's going to be super hot and I know I'm going to want to have the aircon on anyway. I really like freeze drying for a lot of reasons, because it gives you, as I said, the flexibility. So lately I have freeze dried a bunch of tromboncino soup, which I just made using the basic Thermomix pumpkin soup recipe. And instead of pumpkin, I used tromboncinos from my garden. And this bone broth in here is like 3 years old, and you can see by the way it rolls around easily in the jar that there's no sticking, nothing. This is still dry as a bone, so I still have essentially my own, I think in America they call them bouillon cubes, but I essentially have my own broth ready to go at a moment's notice. I do still can bone broth, and this is goat broth for the dogs, and in a way this is awesome because it is literally pop and pour and you're ready to go. You don't have to wait for defrosting or anything. But I don't love pressure canning. I find since I moved to this house, it's induction stove rather than gas. I just find it takes forever for the pressure canner to heat up, like forever, and it takes hours to do the bone broth. So I find it much more irritating. Yeah, okay, it takes 48 hours or something to do a whole batch of bone broth, but the amount in here is, how much would it be equivalent wise? It would be significantly different. This would probably be the equivalent of 2 or 3 trays in the large freeze dryer, which would be at least 3 or 4 liters, probably more like 4.5 liters of bone broth, whereas this is just under 1 liter. So you get a bit more bang for your buck in terms of that. The other really big thing that I love about my freeze dry is that if I am on top of my game, which I am often not, it allows me to maintain as much of the nutritional value of food as possible. So every time you cook, you are essentially processing that food, and every time you process it, you are losing nutritional value from the food, which is why they talk about processed food in the supermarket being so bad for you, because God only knows how many times that food has been processed to make a muesli bar or whatever it is that we're buying on the shelves, plus what it's been sprayed with. So I know exactly where this food came from. I know what it's been sprayed with, nothing. I know what chemicals it's been exposed to, and that is purely environmental and the fertilizers that I use when I plant it, because I am just building the soil in this area. It has very little homegrown compost, because homegrown compost takes about a year to make, and we've only lived here for 18 months. But over time, it will have less and less and be as close to organic as possible. And I say as close to as possible because I know that even if my neighbors never sprayed Roundup, and I know that they do, I know that our council sprays Roundup because lately I saw them, and then when you drive down the road 2 days later, you can see like a brown strip beside the road and then a green strip like 1.5 meters away from where they sprayed. So you can see an exact line where they sprayed, and it's annoying, but there's nothing I can do about that. So it's not 100% organic, but it's as close as I can get and afford to. Anyway, I wandered off on a side path. My point was that if I am on top of harvesting and processing my food, which I think if I had a smaller freeze dryer, it would actually be easier to do, because you wouldn't have to have so much food to fill up the large, fill up a large tray takes quite a bit of food, especially if it's like fresh stuff like spinach or herbs and things like that. It takes quite a bit to fill up a tray and make it worthwhile to run a load. A smaller tray would make that easier, but then like part of the reason why I got the big one is so that I could process a lot of food all in one go. So there's, anyway, but the point is that when you pick food, if you can process it immediately, when you freeze dry, you maintain like 95 to 97% of the nutritional value in the food. Whereas when you process it, as I was saying, every time you cook it down, you lose a little bit more, Things like vitamin C, you basically kill it if you cook it. So this is a way of preserving some of the vitamins in that food and eating it fresh when it's not in season. So I can eat cucumber chips that I have made in winter and maintain all of the goodness that's in the cucumber, just minus the water, and I still get all of the benefits of that, even though I can't grow cucumbers outside. Most foods will lose about 30% of their nutritional density and nutritional value within a couple of days of being picked. Things like spinach will lose 90% of their nutritional value within 48 hours, which to me is insane. So I try and either pick my spinach and blanch and freeze it that night, which again, blanching it is still cooking it, so you're losing some of the nutritional value, or I try and stick it straight in the freeze dryer. I haven't been as good with using my freeze dryer lately because, as I said, it gets really hot in that room, and it means I need to run the aircon in summer to keep that room cool. In winter it's fine, I can just open the window. But if you haven't got enough solar to run the machine and you don't have a battery, in Australia it is very expensive to have a freeze dryer, and that is something I don't see talked about a lot on freeze drying videos, because most people who have freeze dryers and are making videos about them are, to be fair, in America, and you guys have energy costs that are so much lower than ours. I haven't actually done the calculations lately, and I don't know what my current electric costs are, but it uses roughly 1 kilowatt per hour to use the large Harvest Right freeze dryer. It needs to be on its own, I think it's like 20 amp circuit. So you need to actually have it on its own circuit, which might include some electrical work being done before you can use the Harvest Right. But when I did the calculations, because when I first got the freeze dryer, I was super excited and I was freeze drying everything all the time, always. It was always running, and I just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And then I got my electric bill and it was like $800 and I nearly fainted. And I worked out that it costs, for a 48 to 54 hour load, which is about standard, it costs about $20 to run a load, and in America it seems to cost them about $2.50 with the price of energy. And to be fair, this was probably about 3 years ago when I got the machine, so things have, we all know, changed in between now and then in terms of our energy costs, but it's not cheap. So it has made me less inclined to use my freeze dryer, and knowing that, I probably wouldn't buy another freeze dryer if I had my time again, because I think it is much harder to get the value for your money when your energy costs are expensive as they are in Australia. I hope to at some point save up enough to get a battery, because in summer I can draw like 54 kilowatts from my solar system in a day, so that would be more than enough to happily run the freeze dryer and the air conditioning 24/7, but at the moment I can't do that because it's going to cost me money. So I still don't have a $0 electric bill, even though I have a significant solar system, because this is still drawing a lot of energy overnight. It is what it is. So just if you're thinking about a freeze dryer, work out what 1 kilowatt per hour is going to cost you in energy and times it by at least 48, because that is the average length of time that the freeze dryer is going to be running every time you put it on for a large freeze dryer. And that just is going to give you a little bit of an idea about the costs of having it. Would I buy another one again? As I said, I don't think I would, knowing the cost of running per batch. I do enjoy my freeze dryer. I think I have made that abundantly clear, but there are some real definite downsides to having and using one. One of the other downsides is maintenance. So again, if you're in America, it's probably not too much of a drama because you can take it to places to get serviced. In Australia, you are out of luck, my friend. I think I'm still under warranty. I think it has a 3-year warranty, but I have already had to replace the fan in it. It just died. And like, in order to get the diagnostics done was a nightmare, because Harvest Right, they tell you to call for assistance. And I emailed and said, look, I'm in Australia. I don't ideally want to do the long distance call and be on hold for ages. Can we please, can I talk to someone via email or arrange a time for a Zoom meeting? Got a response saying, no, call. So I had to call, and I was on hold for 25 minutes or something before I actually spoke to a human. And then the human was like, why are you calling? We organize Zoom meetings for international people. And I was like, okay. And that's happened a couple of times. And but then even when you're doing emailing back and forth, which is generally then what they do, they don't actually organize a Zoom call. It's such a lag between me sending the information they want and them getting back to me that it takes days to get anywhere. And I had to take the entire case off the Harvest Right machine, which was a nightmare to get back together, just because I was doing it by myself and it's big and fiddly, not because it's actually complicated. But I had to take, and I was just so worried that I was going to ruin something, and this machine's so expensive and it's not like I can take it anywhere to get it fixed. And then they were like, yeah, your fan died and you need to replace it. And I was like, what? And they sent me a video and all these instructions, and I was going to have to do this cable and this cable, and I was like, what? No, I don't have that level of skill. I can't do that. And they were like, well, either you have to do it or you have to send it back to us, and you can send it back to us at your cost. And I was like, do you have any idea what the shipping on something that's 80 kilos is going to be? And plus, I can't just trundle that down to my local post office and put a little stamp on it and be like, see ya. It's just... So we came to an agreement that they would pay for the electrician to come out and do the thing that needed to be done. It took the electrician 2.5 hours to change it. So, okay, it might be really easy if you work at Harvest Right and all you do is change fans, but it would have taken me forever, and I would not have been certain that I wasn't going to break the machine by putting it back together, which then would have been my liability. Thankfully, the electrician seems to have forgotten that that happened and never sent me a bill, and Harvest Right obviously hasn't followed up, and neither have I. So at this stage, it's working and it's fine, and it's... But we now have another problem because I didn't use it for a long time, because the fan was broken. The pump has now got some black stuff on the inside when I changed the oil the other day, because apparently if you're not running them regularly enough, they essentially, the mister gets, I don't know, gets moisture in there or something, and now I have to pull apart the pump and clean the pump. And a new pump is $900. So it's not something that you just stuff it, I'll just get a new one. So now I'm going to have to take it apart and clean it out and hope that I put it back together properly and hope that I don't break this machine that is really, really expensive. So yeah, there are maintenance issues, and even just software updates that you need to do periodically, otherwise it gets mad. But all in all, it is a pretty easy machine. You literally just put stuff in, close the door, close the valve, and press start, and that's it. If you guys remember back to the very beginning of this video where I let you guys hear what it actually sounds like when it's running, that noise is in your house for like 48 hours. And to be honest, I'm not bad with noises and things like that. To me now it's almost like white noise and I barely hear it, but it is much more annoying obviously if you're in this area of the house than if I'm in the other end of the house. And it does mean that like I can't have it running and have people over for dinner, or I can't have it on and film and talk to you guys. So there are restrictions that I find annoying sound-wise, but you know, it's got some pretty good pluses. But I honestly don't know if I would buy another freeze dryer if I had the money and had the opportunity. I just don't know that I would. It also takes up a huge amount of space in the pantry, and I really want to get a different table for it so I can roll it out and vacuum around it and all of that sort of stuff. But it is heavy. It takes like 3 people to move it safely, or 2 very strong people, and it's awkward to lift, and it's difficult to find a rolly table that is going to fit in that space and take the weight and the size of that machine. So I think, again, if I had my time over, I would go a size down. But then if I had a large family, I don't think I would go a size down. Because it's just me, it's a bit easier. But yeah, I mean, look, it's got its pros. I've done things like freeze dry pretty much perfectly balanced meals for my dogs that are cooked. And I've got 3 days worth for both dogs in a bag this size, not like 1 day per bag. And my dogs are big dogs. And that is for if we ever have to evacuate. So I know that we have food for the dogs that they will eat, ready to go. If you guys have seen some of the other videos of my channel, I talk through that more in, it's a video about my evacuation bags, so bug out bags, because we live in an area where if there was a bushfire, there's only 2 single lane roads out. So if we were leaving, we'd have to leave really early. But I also have 3 days worth of food for me in that bag, and if we had to evacuate, the real bonus of the freeze-dried food is that it's so light. So 1 tray, I turn that into 4 packs, which is a lot for a meal, but worst case scenario, I could happily survive off 1 of these per day, and this is grams instead of kilos. Like these I couldn't transport with me in an emergency. They'd shatter and break and cause more trouble. So there are some real benefits, and it just kind of depends what you want to do with the freeze dryer. The other thing I use the freeze dryer a lot for is things like powdering zucchini, because often you have a ton of zucchini that comes out of the garden, and there's only so much zucchini you can eat in summer without like, you know, feeling some things about zucchini. And I powder the zucchini, and sometimes I put it in the dog's meal. I put tons of it in spaghetti bolognese, and then no one knows it's even there. I powder beetroots, and then I put that in milkshakes and things like that, or I put it in pancake mixture and no one knows it's there. The other thing I've done with powdered stuff is my niece told me one year, I'm apparently in charge of making her birthday cakes. She let me know that she wanted a 4-layer cake for her Elsa birthday party, and she wanted mango, blueberry, raspberry, and strawberry. So I freeze dried kilos of fruit and I powdered it, and I made a white chocolate vanilla cake, just a white chocolate cake, and each layer was a different fruit layer with a white chocolate icing, and oh my god, it was so good. Like it actually tasted and looked like real strawberry, real blueberry, real mango. I should do more of that. But so I do stuff like that. I add the powders for either extra health benefits or extra flavor into all sorts of things. And the fact that you have been able to powder heaps of tomatoes into such a small amount means that you can put a huge amount of vitamins and fiber and all the nutritional goodness from whatever it was that you freeze dried into whatever it is that you're making. So like when I make, again, spaghetti bolognese, often I will use powdered tomatoes to kind of thicken the mixture up so I don't have to cook it for as long, to reduce the stock levels in there, because I like to put a lot of beef stock in my spaghetti bolognese. And so essentially I have a ton of tomato in my spaghetti bolognese, but I don't have all that watery stuff that comes from the tomato because it's been sucked out by the freeze dryer. So I can add so much more nutritional value, so much more fiber to every mouthful. And for me, that's just really important health-wise, and it helps me manage the vast quantities of food that come out of the garden at given points. And sometimes you have periods where nothing's coming out of the garden, and so then I'm very grateful for all my processing efforts, but it helps me process often what is, when you do those harvests, way more food than one person could ever conceivably eat before it goes bad. And then it also, like with the zucchini in the bolognese, in each mouthful of bolognese, I am eating so much more vegetable than I would otherwise if I had just been putting like shredded frozen zucchini in or whatever. It really works out. I really like my freeze dryer. There are some real cons to it, and I know that this has been a very rambly video, but hopefully that makes sense, and talking you guys through some of the pros and cons. And obviously I'm going to show you some of the meals that I have been focusing on making lately with the freeze dryer, and I hope that you guys have enjoyed kind of seeing how I do this, what I'm doing with this, what it sounds like to have a freeze dryer in your house. And yeah, if you have any questions about it, definitely let me know below in the comments. I think the only one that I can think of off the top of my head that I haven't covered is that I got my freeze dryer from Oz Farmer, and I think, from memory, by the time you include shipping from America, the cost of the machine, and the fact that it needs to, and Oz Farmer do this, have an electrician change the like the plug system over so that it's compatible with Australian energy supply. I think by the time you do that and convert from US dollars, it was like $6,000 or $7,000. So it's not a small investment at all, which is why, like, I don't know if I'd do it again, but yeah, but I have it now, so hopefully I'm making the most of it. And if you guys have any ideas of awesome meals that I could freeze dry that would potentially help me get through hard times ahead or stressful times ahead, that would be much appreciated. Pop them in the comments below, or any ideas for things that you guys have freeze dried that have turned out really well. I would really appreciate that. And hopefully you guys have enjoyed this, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. I thought I would just quickly show you guys some of my favorites. So I fill trays and trays with beef bone broth, which I use. And you can see this is from 2 or 3 years ago. You can see how dry that still is. And this is great because you can just pour it straight in to absolutely anything and it's ready to go. Here are the tomatoes we just did. So these are a mix of Romas and pineapple tomatoes that I had ripe and ready to go. And the same mix is in this jar, except there's a massive difference in the quantity of tomatoes that are actually in this jar. But I love seeing the color divide, but you can see it's all nice and dry and beautiful and ready to be used at any given moment. Color wise, my favorite is the beetroot powder. It is just gorgeous, and I need to think of some ways to use this beyond using it in smoothies and pancakes, because I don't eat pancakes that often because they're not that great for you. I have looked into maybe capsulizing this, but I think it's probably just easier to find a recipe that I can dump heaps of beautiful antioxidants from homegrown beets into, but oh, the color, the camera does no justice to the color. It's absolutely gorgeous. This is the tromboncino soup, and I hope to do the exact same thing with the pumpkin soup. Now that I'm starting to bring pumpkins out of the garden, I'm only just starting to though, so they just need to cure for a little bit before I start to do that. And then the really beautiful thing about this is I'm going to be able to just add water and my soup is ready to go. So all I'll have to do is boil water and my meal is ready. So I'm really excited about that. I do need to make sure I label this one because it looks very, very similar to my veggie stock. And I just used the Thermomix veggie stock paste recipe, which I actually need to make a lot more of. It is the most divine flavored stock. So I just love it. I really need to make more. This is the basil that I was telling you guys about, and I'll just open it so you can hear how dry that is. And I just love having this basil year round, ready, summer, just in a jar, perfectly flavored, tastes exactly like fresh, if not better. This is, I think, nearly 3 years old. This is zucchini powder, which, as I said, I just dump into everything. Another one of my favorites is lemon zest. So before we moved into this house, it was lemon harvesting season, and the house that I was renting had a couple of very prolific lemon trees. So I spent ages harvesting the lemon juice and the lemon rind and freeze drying it, and it has served me well because most of the time when I need lemon to add into something, I never have it or it's never in season. And so this allows me to still eat seasonally because this is sort of almost snap preserved from the citrus season of, what was that, 2023, I think. And it's just there ready for me whenever I need it. So I use that all the time. These are salted zucchini chips, not zucchini chips, cucumber chips. So I do these a little bit differently now. Now I try to avoid putting the seed in them because I find homegrown cucumbers for some reason have massive seeds in them compared to store-bought ones. So I try to just remove all the seeds and I kind of make more stick type chips. But these preserve beautifully, taste lovely with a bit of salt on them, and the kids love these chips. And the rosemary just kind of looks like rosemary. So nothing too exciting to see there.
My most favorite thing is freeze-dried mango. So if you have it in larger chunks, kids go nuts for it because it has the consistency of honeycomb. I also like to do smaller chunks, and I use it as a crouton in a salad, and it is so good as a crouton. Because I'm gluten-free and at various times I can't eat dairy or eggs, this is a great substitute for a crouton, and it tastes sensational.
I hope you guys have enjoyed seeing a little bit of what I do with the freeze dryer, and hopefully if you have a freeze dryer, it's given you some ideas of things you could do too.